The best JRPGs of 2022. That's what we'll be talking about in this video. Normally I only do a top 5, but this year has been absolutely loaded with JRPGs I loved, so we'll be bumping it up to 10. Starting with one of my favorite indie JRPGs of the year, Jackmove. Set in a futuristic cyberpunk world, Jackmove puts you in the role of Noah, a hacker hell-bent on taking down the evil corporation Monomind. I think what I loved most about this game was its vibe. It has an absolutely amazing pixel art style with a lot of glowing objects and a lot of really amazing colors. Not to mention a really cool futuristic soundtrack that just sets the vibe really well. And honestly, I just loved existing in this world. Whether it was the downtown area with all the different shops, the slums with the burning trash cans and all these different people doing their different things, or the corporate HQ where there's a lot of people in the suits trying to make all the money. It also has a pretty cool turn-based combat system. You have 3 different attack types, and so your job in combat is to try to find the weakness of the enemies, expose it, and do the most damage you can. Now, the drawbacks and why it's so low on this list are aplenty. For one, it's kind of short, only 5 to 6 hours. Normally, I don't mind a short JRPG, but I enjoyed this game so much I just wanted more of it. Next are the load times on Nintendo Switch. They're super bad when going between areas and starting battles, so if you have the option, don't play it on Switch. Also has some real balancing issues with a few bosses, in particular the final boss that took me an hour just during the combat itself, so if it had better balancing issues, it might be higher on this list. Nonetheless, it's a cool game and I hope to see more from this studio. I absolutely love farming life sim games and was so delighted to see Rune Factory make its return this year. I know quite a few people had issues with the performance on Switch, but it didn't really bother me as much. I was able to see past it because I just enjoyed the game so much. Now, what elevated this game for me were the character interactions. For me in these types of games, I always love the character interactions, getting to know them throughout the game, but unfortunately they're always a little bit shallow for my taste. However, in this one, they're so much deeper. There's much more dialogue, so many more side events, and just so much more to get into. Not to mention a great cast of characters to get to know. Whether it was the girls that you can date, the wacky side characters, or whoever it might be, I loved getting to know everyone in this town. Not to mention it just has a great daily loop of going farming, fishing, and fighting. No matter what time of day it is, there's always something going on. Now I'd be really curious to try this game again on PC with better performance, but nonetheless, it's still a great game that I enjoyed quite a bit. Now, I'll admit that I've never been the biggest Star Ocean fan. In fact, I would say I've never really liked any of the previous games. However, there was something really cool here with a Divine Force. I think what I enjoyed most was the exploration. There were so many big zones that you could walk around and find little treasure chests, get into combat, so many great towns to explore that had verticality, and this is all thanks to the Duma system. With this, it essentially allowed you to fly and see parts of the level that normally you wouldn't be able to see in a traditional JRPG. I just love zooming around in combat and getting to the tops of buildings and finding little things to upgrade my characters with. It was just such a blast. Now, for the combat system, it does feel a little weird at first, but ultimately I came around to it and really enjoyed it. I think the best part is the variety of styles between the different characters. Whether it was Raymond with his sword, Marielle with her guns, or Nina who can't even attack and can only heal, there was always something new to try and I really enjoyed it. Now, I will say that the game is really lacking in the visual department. Now, don't get me wrong, it has great character design. Hello, Elena. But the art style itself is kind of bland. Not to mention, the story was kind of boring and I never felt invested. Here's hoping this is a great stepping stone to an even better sequel. I absolutely love what Square Enix is doing with the HD 2D series of games, in particular the Live Alive remake. Now, this is an old Super Nintendo JRPG that was stranded in Japan for decades, but finally made it west this year with a remake. Now, in the game, there's a series of 8 short adventures that you'll partake in with a variety of gameplay. Whether it's pure adventure with the little egg robot Cube, stealthing around with the ninja Obamaru. No matter what scenario you're going through, there's just so much variety and always something different to partake in. And what's cool is if you're not feeling one of the scenarios, they never last more than 4 to 5 hours, so you'll be done with it pretty quickly and on to the next one. Now, the Saga games have always tried to do this with 8 characters and coming together and doing different things, but I personally never found them very interesting. In my opinion, Live Alive is the best iteration of this idea. And like I mentioned at the top, the visual style does a lot of heavy lifting and looks absolutely amazing here. Not to mention a really great soundtrack. This is one of the more novel JRPGs you'll ever play, and it's absolutely worth giving a try. Now, it's debatable if Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is even a JRPG, but I loved it, so I don't care, I'm putting it on this list. Now, the premise is that this is a reimagining of the original Final Fantasy on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And to say it's a reimagining is really stretching it because it almost has nothing to do with the story. Now, for the gameplay itself, it's much more like Nioh or a Souls combat, just much faster paced like Nioh. It's really challenging but fair. It really relies on a lot of dodging, parrying, blocking, and just reading your enemy's movements. And the combat itself just feels so good. And to me, it didn't really matter that the levels were pretty linear because I just loved getting into combat, fighting these different enemies, and trying out the huge variety of classes. And what's cool is you're constantly getting new ones. There's like a couple dozen throughout the game, and it's neat to experiment and see which one you enjoy most. Now, Koei Tecmo really supported this game with DLC post-launch that I enjoyed a lot. There was some really cool content, some really cool post-game stuff that I dug into a lot. Now, I totally understand that this game isn't for everyone, but for my taste, I absolutely loved playing every second of it. You can totally just skip the story though, unless you really want to partake in the cringe. While I've played and beat every Xenoblade Chronicles game, they've really never resonated with me. That is until Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now, for all intents and purposes, it's the same structure of the past games, but what really set it apart for me were the story and the characters. The premise is that all the characters in your party have 10 years to live, and so they're constantly wrestling with their own mortality and what they want to do before their life is over. And as someone that's getting older, that really resonated with me. It kept me hooked, and I wanted to see what these characters would say and how they would act and how they would deal with the different situations that would come up. Now, admittedly, the combat UI is kind of a mess when you look at it. However, once you start playing, it kind of just disappears and it was fun to play. I ended up just looking at my character's positioning and all the different attack alerts so I could pull off the best moves possible. I also loved unlocking new classes and trying different combinations on different characters. And personally, what I thought was really cool is the fact that the outfits changed as well. I'm a big fashion person when it comes to games and having my characters wear different equipment, so it was really cool that when they changed classes, they also changed their outfits. Also, exploring this game is so fun because the world is so massive and there's tons of things to find. Now, of course, this game is not without its drawbacks. For me, what kept it from being higher on this list is the length of the game. Now, I totally understand that's a positive for most people. You want to get a lot of value out of your games, and I totally understand that. But someone like me that plays a lot of long JRPGs for this channel, it's hard to find time for 100+ hour games like Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Also, the visuals. While the art style is strong, it's stranded on the Nintendo Switch, and it's starting to really chug and show its age. I would say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is probably my favorite in the series, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Monolith do something brand new going forward. Now I'm just as surprised as you are to see Trails from Zero this high on the list. Famously, I'm not the biggest Trails of Cold Steel fan, however, I did enjoy the Trails in the Sky games, so I was wondering, would I like Trails from Zero? And I did. I think what really worked about this game for me was the small cast of characters and scope of the game. You'll start with your full party from the very beginning, and you'll get time to know them really, really well. Not to mention, the characters themselves are just really interesting, really cool, and all have very diverse personalities. And you also get to know the town of Crossbell and its surrounding areas really well also. Just like a police officer would get to know the town they patrol really well, I got to know Crossbell really well. Whether it be the different citizens, the different businesses, the different parts of town, it was really cool to explore it quite a bit and know it intimately by the end. Also, it has a pretty solid combat system. It really relies on positioning and making sure you're hitting enemies from certain spots. Also, that turbo mode is pretty great for trash enemies, but also great to turn off for bosses to really implement great strategies. After finishing this game, I'm now super excited to see the conclusion of the story with Azure in 2023, so I can't wait to play that game. Maybe the most surprising game on this list, especially considering how high it is the Diofield Chronicle. Now, it's a real-time strategy RPG where you'll control a party of 4 characters in a map, and you'll be doing basic objectives like defeating enemies or capture points. Honestly, the combat system is relatively simple, but really satisfying at the same time. I think what hooked me most was the variety of gameplay. The battles themselves are relatively short, maybe 4 to 5 minutes each, but then once you finish, you'll go back to your base to level up your characters, upgrade your equipment, get into character conversations, and do side quests. And what's cool is everything is relatively quick, so you're never in one activity for too long, you're always on to the next one. I personally love gameplay variety. I think that's what keeps me so hooked with the Persona games, and that's what kept me really hooked here with the Diofield Chronicle. Now I understand this game isn't for everyone, but for me, I really loved it. And also the other reason I fell in love with this game was Waltaquin. Now she starts off as the typical damsel in distress, this princess that you're trying to help, but at some point in the story, her character arc just makes a sharp right turn, and she just invokes all this chaos. To me, at times, she reminded me of the Joker. I didn't really care about the larger story, I just wanted to see what Waltaquin would do next, and that always made story moments really fascinating. And what's neat is they're going to be adding free story DLC for her next year, so I can't wait to play that. I also got the Platinum Trophy here, which I only do for games I really love, so that really says a lot about what I think of the Diofield Chronicle. Now, I know it didn't sell super well, but I'm really hoping that over time it can pick up some steam and that we can get an awesome sequel because I want so much more from this world. Going into 2022, Triangle Strategy was the game I expected to be my game of the year, and while it didn't quite hit number 1, it's still really high on this list. I think what stuck out to me so much was its map design. It does a really great job of marrying combat abilities that your characters have and incorporating them well into level design. I think this is something that a lot of strategy RPGs fail to do and end up just making for really boring battles. What was also pretty unique was the choice system. At certain points in the game, you're asked to make these decisions and have characters vote on what you should do next. It's neat because you get different characters, different scenarios, and the story can play out in totally different ways. Now, in my experience, it felt like you couldn't quite get all the scenarios you wanted in your first playthrough, but it seems like New Game Plus is required to see everything this game had to offer. Also, it has an awesome art style and soundtrack. The presentation in this game is totally on point, even if the voice acting wasn't that great. Also, it had more of an emphasis on the story than I was expecting. I was really hoping for more battles, and if it balanced that out a little bit better, it probably would have been number 1, but nonetheless, I'm glad it saw a lot of success, and I'm hoping they do more of these in the future. Hands down, the biggest surprise for me for 2021 and my game of the year is Chained Echoes. Now, on the surface, it looks like just another 16-bit throwback JRPG. However, when you look deeper, there's so much more to it. For one, it has a really unique spin on turn-based combat. It has a system called the Overdrive system, where every time you do a move or take any type of action, it moves this bar a little to the right a little bit more. And what you're trying to do is stay right in this green zone because you'll be able to do more damage, take less damage, and your abilities won't cost as much. This kept me really engaged in every single battle and stopped me from just mashing my most powerful attack. Something else the game does a really great job of is inviting you to explore its world. The environments here are huge, whether it be the zones in between towns or the towns themselves. It was so fun doing the traditional JRPG thing of going into towns, looting everybody's houses, taking their money and items, or just finding items hidden away in little alleyways or alcoves. Exploring is absolutely my favorite thing to do in games, so I'm glad it was so awesome and inviting here in Chained Echoes. Also, the presentation is absolutely incredible. It has some of the best 16-bit pixel work I've ever seen in a game, not to mention a pretty outstanding soundtrack. Now, ultimately, why I feel like it was number 1 on my list for me is because it felt so fresh. Now, I play a lot of JRPGs every year, and to me, they all kind of meld together in my head over the course of a year. So for something to really stand out and be my game of the year, it needs to either be super high quality or really unique, and for Chained Echoes, it did both. Now, for those of you that only play a handful of JRPGs a year, this might not seem as refreshing or interesting. I totally get that, but for me, it absolutely did. And the really crazy thing is that this was made all by one guy. Hats off to you, my friend. Not to mention, it's one of the top 5 highest reviewed games of the year, so if that isn't a reason for you to go pick it up if you haven't already, I don't know what will be. I'm hoping this game has huge sales success, and I can't wait to play more from Matthias Linda, the solo dev of this game. Now, if you want to hear about some awesome hidden gem JRPGs from 2022, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you love JRPGs and you haven't subscribed already, click subscribe right here so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.